Hey everyone, welcome back to Strange Mind 6. I'm your host Ruby, and today we're going to be reading An Outbreak of Witchcraft, a graphic novel of the Salem Witch Trials, written by Deborah Noyes, I hope I said the last name right, and illustrated by M. Duffy. But before we begin, I would like to ask if you guys can hit that like button and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It would mean a great deal to me if you did. A little bit of the backstory of this. It says, a gripping tale of paranoia at its worst. An outbreak of witchcraft visually imagines the haunting details of the Salem witch trials. In this bewitching narrative nonfiction graphic novel from 1692 to 1693, fear reigned in Salem, Massachusetts. The night Abigail Williams and Betty Paris first accused their servant of witchcraft was only the beginning. Several more accusations would follow suit, sparking a widespread panic that consumed Salem in one of the longest cases of witch trials in America, during which more than 20 innocent lives were lost and mistrust ran amok. The community was in ruins. From the afflicted who fanned the flames of superstition, to the judges who used their power unjustly, to the accused who were falsely charged and hanged in consequence. In the absence of due process, and with hysteria abounding, no one in Salem was safe. Journey into how it all began in this arresting, true-to-life look at how lies became facts, friends turned to foes, and loved ones turned to enemies. Such was the darkness of that day, that we walked in the clouds and could not see our way, and we have most cause to be humbled for error on that hand which cannot be retrieved. John Hale, A Modest Inquiry into the Nature of Witchcraft. The Afflicted. Abigail Hobbs, wild teenage girl originally from Casco Bay, Maine, who confesses and accuses many, including Reverend George Burroughs. Deliverance Hobbs, Abigail's stepmother, confessed witch and energetic accuser. Elizabeth Hubbard, 17-year-old grandniece of Dr. Griggs. Margaret Jacobs, confessed witch, who accuses her grandfather George Jacobs Sr. and Reverend George Burroughs. Mercy Lewis, 17-year-old servant in the Putnam household and survivor of Native American raids in Maine. Betty Elizabeth Paris, 9-year-old daughter of Reverend Samuel Paris. Ann Putnam Jr., 12-year-old friend of Betty and Abigail, daughter of Thomas Putnam and Ann Putnam Sr. Ann Putnam Sr., mother of Ann Jr., and wife of Thomas Putnam. Mary Warren, 20-year-old servant of Elizabeth and John Proctor. Abigail Williams, 11-year-old niece of Reverend Samuel Paris, orphaned in a Native American raid in Maine. The Accused. Bridget Bishop, bold, outspoken resident of Salem town who fancies red dresses and showy lace, married 3 times. Reverend George Burroughs, Burley, former minister of Salem Village, now a minister in Wells, Maine. Sarah Cloyce and Mary Easty, Rebecca's well-respected sisters. Gills Corey, Martha's third husband, a pugnacious farmer. Martha Corey, church-going woman with a past. Philip and Mary English, wealthy Salem merchant and his wife. Mercy and Dorothy Good, Sarah Good's infant and 4-year-old daughter. Sarah Good, surly beggar. John Indian, Titubius' husband, enslaved in the Paris household, and an accuser as well. George Jacobs Sr., 80-year-old farmer with rheumatism and a weary sense of humor. Rebecca, nurse. Pious, 71-year-old grandmother. John and Elizabeth Proctor, successful Salem Village farmer and tavern keeper, and his pregnant wife. The accused continued. Sarah Osborne, a 49-year-old, ostensibly bedridden, long absent from the church. Tituba, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but an enslaved Arawak woman in the home of Reverend Samuel Parris. Family members of the accused: Peter Cloyce, Sarah's husband; Francis Nurse, Rebecca's husband. Witch hunters and men in power: Ezekiel Cheever, court recorder and village schoolmaster; Jonathan Corwin, town merchant and justice of the peace; Thomas Danforth, magistrate and acting governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony before the arrival of William Phipps. He is ultimately critical of the trial proceedings. Judge John Hawthorne, magistrate and interrogator during the preliminary witchcraft investigations. Increase and Cotton Mather, influential father and son ministers from Boston who write sensational books about witchcraft but ultimately call for an end to spectral evidence during the trials. Nicholas Noyes, Salem town pastor, official minister of and avid participant in the juried trials held at the court of Oyer and Terminer in Salem town. Witch hunters and men in power continued. Reverend Samuel Parris, Salem Village's minister. William Phipps, royal governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Edward Putnam, Thomas's brother, a church deacon. Thomas Putnam, father of Anne Jr. and top supporter of Reverend Parris. He makes some 140 accusations of witchcraft. Judge Nathaniel Saltonstall, Oyer and Terminer judge who steps down before the court begins to meet. Judge Samuel Sewall, Oyer and Terminal judge who repents in 1697. Judge William Stoughton, Chief Justice of the Special Court of Oyer and Terminer, formed to try witchcraft cases. Part 1. An Outbreak of Witchcraft. The Salem witch trials are one of the great mysteries of American history. Before the year 1692 was over, more than 20 innocent people would be put to death for the crime of witchcraft, while others would die in shackles, jails overflowed, mothers and children were separated, and families turned on one another. Both eyewitnesses and modern scholars describe the events of 1692 as you would a sudden medical contagion, using words like fever, outbreak, and plague. But the discovery of witchcraft in Salem and its surrounding communities wasn't novel. Between the 1300s and the 1600s, tens of thousands of accused witches, mostly women, were tried in courts throughout Europe and executed for invisible crimes. Many 17th century people believed in the devil. He was real and present to them. Witches were the devil's servants, granted power to harm others in exchange for loyalty. If your milk curdled, you blamed a witch. If your crops withered, it was under a witch's evil hand. Most charges of witchcraft were between neighbors when one or the other suffered a misfortune after an argument, and dislike and suspicion became accusation. Paranoia and superstition sowed blame and hysteria. And in societies that took the Bible's "thou shalt not suffer a witch to live" literally, persecuting the innocent was common practice. The witch hunters of Salem were Puritans, devout fundamentalist Christians, who saw good and evil as relentlessly present. Every word and action had divine consequences. Crop failures, Native American raids, smallpox epidemic, and other disasters were the price of living in a remote outpost. They were punishments, the wages of sin. They were the Lord's wrath. Sermons spoke of the ongoing battle between God and Satan, and the devil had help, a constant threat to society. Witches, wizards, warlocks, or sorcerers if male. Technically, that's what they thought, but witches, the term witch, is actually male or female. It doesn't have an actual gender to it. But back to the story. Favored secret rituals and kept servants of their own. Animal familiars, cats, dogs, birds, snakes, that fed from their flesh or sipped their blood. Though Puritan doctrine strictly forbade it, English folk magic offered protections against the evil done by witches. Benign magic such as using a witch cake to help identify an afflicted person's tormentor. The urine of the afflicted person was baked into the cake and fed to a dog. Some believed this would cause excruciating pain to the witch or even kill them. Salem happened just as the witch hysteria overseas was fading under the Enlightenment. But it wasn't the first such case in colonial New England, which had already tried 80 accused witches by 1692. Alice Young of Windsor, Connecticut, was the first person on record to be convicted and executed for witchcraft in America. Little is known of her case except that she was hung on May 26, 1647, 5 years after Connecticut made witchcraft a crime punishable by death from a gallows erected in Hartford's Meeting House Square. Young wasn't the last executed witch in Connecticut. 30 years before Salem, the Hartford witch panic of 1662 prompted 7 trials and 4 executions. In all, Connecticut sent 11 people, 9 women and 2 men, to the gallows. Margaret Jones, a midwife from Charlestown, was the first person to be executed for witchcraft in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. She was hanged on June 15, 1648. So why are the Salem witch trials a cultural flashpoint in American history, while the names of other witch hunt victims have faded with time? The biggest and most prolonged single episode of witchcraft on record, the trials left an impressive paper trail. While earlier records were lost, court transcripts and eyewitness accounts of Salem proceedings were preserved and, in a few cases, published, amounting to a gripping and apparently unprecedented true tale of mass hysteria. A few years before Salem, Cotton Mather, minister of the North Church, documented a particularly sensational witchcraft case in Boston. John Goodwin's children began to display terrifying symptoms. They seemed racked with pain, at times unable to see, hear, or speak. Their tongues appeared to snake down their throats, their heads swiveled owl-like, their backs arched, and their limbs contorted. So pretty much epilepsy. That's what they had. The Goodwin children blamed a laundress goodwife, Glover. Women of lower rank were addressed as goodwife or goody, with Mrs. reserved for higher-ranking females, for their afflictions. Irish Catholic and already subject to Puritan prejudice, Glover was swiftly convicted of witchcraft and put to death. In Salem, the fever to root out and punish witches began in the home of the village minister Samuel Parris. By the time Parris started his job in July of 1689, Salem Village, today Danvers, had a history of political infighting, feuds, and land disputes. Rival factions couldn't agree on how the village should be run, with many farmers determined to separate from Salem town and establish an independent church and government. Others saw the benefit of ties to the town. Like the 3 ministers before him, 2 of whom would resurface during the witch trials, Parris found himself caught in the middle of squabbling parishioners who often refused to pay his salary, provide firewood for parsonage, or keep up renovations on the church. Parris did little to cool tensions in the community. Instead, rigid in mind and prone to self-pity, he stalked them into a blaze, restricting access to baptisms and communion to a minority of elected church members, just as he later fueled the witch hunt that began under his own roof, making him a controversial figure. Before he took up his Salem post, Parris and his family had lived in Boston, where they would have followed the dramatic Glover trial and been familiar with the symptoms displayed by Goodwin's children. Parris's young daughter Betty and her cousin Abigail Williams may even have duplicated those symptoms, whether consciously or unconsciously, on the eve of Salem's historic ordeal. But why? Massachusetts was an English colony in 1692, and the witch trials took place during King William's War, a bloody conflict between New England and Canada, known as New France at the time, with its Native American allies. Small scattered English settlements to the north in Maine, the frontier, at the same time, or eastward, were especially vulnerable to attack by French and native forces. After violent raids, displaced and orphaned English settlers flooded into Essex County, with many finding their way to Salem Village. Mercy Lewis, Reverend George Burroughs, and others involved in the witch trials had survived a devastating 1689 raid on Casco, now Portland, Maine. Roughly the same week that Betty Paris and Abigail Williams began to suffer strange fits in the Salem parsonage, a French war party padded through deep snow to gather at the perimeter of York, Maine. Native combatants attacked before dawn, killing and capturing 150 English settlers and torching the village. Word of the raid reached Salem just as witch fever was taking hold, and many historians believe that the added fear and stress, the news, for some triggered traumatic memories of earlier raids, fed the flames of the witch hunt. Puritan ministers, including Paris, had long demonized Native American heathens from the pulpit, aligning them with the devil and evil magic. Tituba, an Arawak woman enslaved by Paris, which I'm actually part Arawak, but we call it Taino in Puerto Rico. Getting back to the story, was among the first women in Salem to be charged with witchcraft. Strong-minded women were often subjected to accusations as a means of control. The most of the accusers at the trials were young female and powerless, their daily lives managed by distracted parents or masters. Fire and brimstone ministers and stern magistrates consisted of Bible study, relentless chores, and numbing boredom. That fateful winter, one of the fiercest on record, with biting winds, heavy snow, and bitter cold, theirs was a world of illness and war, dread and shame, and a degree of exposure to the elements and darkness that today, inside our insulated, well-lit homes, we can only imagine. With wolves and winter storms howling beyond the walls, they had only a stub of candle or dying hearth embers to light them to bed at night, and little relief from tedium, toil, and fear. And with that, my dear friends, we are going to pause and join us within the next video to hear more. This has been Ruby, signing off.